Hi, folks. Yes, I am back again. Um, first and foremost, I am back again. And yes, I am actually going to try to make yet another stab at revitalizing this channel. Again. And oddly enough, it always seems to be October when I'm the best at revitalizing my channel, which should tell me something about how my circadian rhythms work and how they are somehow in time with the October country, which doesn't actually make me upset, but that's neither here nor there. So the other day, me and my friend Mr. E2099, shout out to him for he is awesome and mighty and epic and all the other things. Um, but he and I were hanging out. It was actually kind of a rarity. We were hanging out without having to do an actual stream. But I'm gonna make content out of it nonetheless. God damn it. We were watching Netflix's new Fall of the House of Usher series at his suggestion. Now, naturally, the adaptation, if you could call it that, is a loose one, and it's more of a like supernatural reframing of a show like Billions or um, something or Mad Men or something along those lines. That being said, it was a very very good show about freaking despicable people as it happens, but for pretty much everyone in the show is freaking despicable. But unlike a lot of shows, for the most part, again, modern day writing tropes and um like social justice oriented things to put to the side because it's just the way the cookie crumbles in this day and age. You're never going to get away from it. Such is the rules. Um, but all things considered, it was mostly properly framed, and therefore, when despicable people did despicable people things, they got despicable people consequences bequeathed upon them. However, or actually, no, I guess I shouldn't say however. In addition to that, and in addition to the genuinely pretty good, especially for Halloween oriented stuff, atmosphere, which kudos to you, Netflix, for releasing this on October 12th, which also happened to be my little brother's birthday. He turned 17 this year, but eh. Um, but yeah, so in addition to all of that, they actually managed to develop a really quite interesting um, mystery or series concept, even though it was told out of order, which, as anyone who knows me knows, I perennially hate stories that are told out of order, especially if they're told out of order for nothing but pretentiousness reasons. But in this case, it worked because it helped to actually build the atmosphere and the mystery, and it was a supernatural whodunit, so that kind of worked to some degree. Also, it was told in the form of a memoir, which did help things because that did avoid some of the pitfalls of that kind of structure being pretentious. But that's neither here nor there. Normally, when it comes to those kind of mysteries, I am among the first to get it because once you understand how stories work and how narratives work and how logic works and how human behavior works, and if you know a little bit about mythology and the supernatural in these kind of shows, you can at least make a decent educated guess. However, and it didn't hurt obviously that Mr. E and myself were basically sitting there MST3King this whole thing as it was going on. And he is no dunce in that area either. But between the two of us, we were actually thrown for a loop on this one because, as it happened, the mystery in question actually did surprise the both of us. We kept coming up with fan theories, and those fan theories kept being thrown for a loop or somehow incomplete as we were watching the show. Unfortunately, however, the show actually decided not to opt for giving what is probably the most important and functional answer in the entire show. Because basically, this family, the Ushers, as in the house of, um, make a deal with a supernatural entity, which is the most I can really give you in summary, because again, they don't specify who and what this supernatural entity is exactly. But yes, Roderick Usher and his sister make a deal with this supernatural entity in 1979. And several years later, after they've both lived full lives, their family starts getting picked off by same supernatural entity over and over and over again. And of course, the Ushers are all various degrees of terrible people, and therefore their comeuppance is actually warranted and cathartic for the audience, and yay, and all's well that ends well, which isn't to say that it isn't disturbing as all fuck, which it is, and kudos to them again. But, you would think that at some point in the not too distant future, next Sunday AD, the show would try to elucidate who and what this entity named Verna is. And you would be wrong, because while hints are dropped aplenty and theories could be woven aplenty thereby, we never get a definitive answer as to who and what Verna is. And the writing staff, for once, shut their fucking mouths and decided to leave it open-ended. Which is good for them, and should be something that is encouraged amongst all authors and writers everywhere, because authorial intent is shies, but is shies and a poor excuse for shies. But that's neither here nor there. The problem is that just because the authors don't want to give a definitive singular answer, and while that may be good circumstantially, it is also immensely unsatisfying. And just because the authors either don't know or don't wish to know what the definitive answer would be, doesn't mean that that I am not going to come in and try to essentially put a lasso around that quantum superposition of uncertainty and make it a singular, as correct as possible answer. Now, even if they had put an authorial intent red flag in here somewhere, I still wouldn't take that very seriously, for, as I just previously mentioned, I do not put that much stock in authorial intent, period. But at the very least, it would be a variable worth considering and or something to argue against if I felt that the answer they provided was not an adequate one. But as it happens this time, I don't actually need to go against the flow of authorial intent because they left it open-ended. But just because they don't want a certain answer, or they would prefer an open-ended answer, or they don't know the answer, doesn't mean that the thing in itself, the piece in itself, doesn't provide information and logic to go by there. And as it is my policy to separate the thing in itself from the authorial intent anyway, it actually helps on some level that the authors got out of their own way for once. But nevertheless, I am the authenticator, and I am also he that provides all the mystic zealogs. And I am the guy who knows the lore, goddammit. And so if anyone is going to provide an actual goddamn answer to this ambiguity here, he's going to be me. But I'm not going to do it from my egocentric position either, because that would also be stupid. When you examine a thing in itself, you look at the thing in itself, which means basically dissecting the piece, figuring out what pieces fit where, and taking your own position out of it as much as possible. So we're gonna do that, and we are going to figure out who in the actual hell or otherwise is this Verna creature. So, without further ado, let us do that. Now, the first and most foremost position is probably the... Let's start on the easiest possible level, shall we? This is, of course, an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, or at the very least, it takes massive amounts of inspiration in its structure and its ethos from Edgar Allan Poe. The episodes are literally named after Edgar Allan Poe stories, and several pieces of his work are sprinkled throughout and basically form the mechanics of the universe. So let's take that. And also the episode where most of the clues for who or what Verna is, come from an episode called The Raven, and ravens regularly make appearances throughout the show. Um, we're gonna go with that, and that's easy mode of interpretation number one. The name Verna specifically anagrammatizes to Raven. She is a she is the Raven in terms of posed cosmology. However, that's not an actual answer. That's a starting place. So, where else can we look? Okay, we can look at how this Raven entity occupies itself, or we can go from the position of ravens themselves, or a little bit of both. Now, it's worth noting that this raven entity, this Verna, um, makes a seemingly devil at the crossroads sort of deal with the Usher family, and then proceeds to act as a kind of Grim Reaper figure throughout the rest of the story for the Usher family. Um, so, is there somewhere we can go with that? Well, yes, obviously. In damn near every culture where raven symbolism exists, actually, ravens are associated with death, or being able to travel between worlds. All birds are, on some level, in most cultures, thought to be able to travel between worlds, including between the world of the living and the dead. But ravens and crows in particular, blackbirds, are particularly associated with death. And in many cultures and in many symbologies, ravens act as what are known as zygopomps, or basically the guardians and guides between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They basically act as friendly guardian Grim Reaper creatures. Um, so, yes, ravens are associated with death and the underworld and so on, and also the kind of liminal space between the two, which is significant because Verna also operates in this way. Many times she uses liminality to her advantage. Okay, so we have something to go on in the Raven itself, associated with death, associated with liminality, associated with the underworld. Okay, now we can focus on what Verna does, which is essentially engineer a kind of devil at the crossroads deal with the Usher family that results in them getting the wealth and the power and the glory and the money and so on and so on and so on, and remain untouched by the legal system for all that time, and then have to lose the entire bloodline. So, can we divine anything from that? Yes, well, the obvious answer would be, is this literally a devil at the crossroads situation? Is she supposed to be the devil? Um, well, one, she's female, so that does throw some kind of wrench in the works. And I guess we could chalk that up to some kind of social justice diversity casting, but I'm not so sure we're supposed to. And that's an out of universe affectation. That's not an in universe piece of logic. So let's stick within the in universe logic for a bit longer and see if that yields us anything. Okay, so she's not the devil. Could she then be a she demon? Someone like Lilith, perhaps. She's a cradle. Lilith, or Lilitu, or Lamashtu, is a cradle robbing demon, and cradle robbing is significant here because she takes out all of Roderick Usher's children and grandchildren. Okay, so and Lilith is sometimes associated with the night. Does that take the cake? Does that create a strong enough association between Lilith and the way Verna operates that she could be Lilith? Kind of sure. It tells us more that it gives us more than what we had 5 minutes ago, but it's still not exactly a satisfying or thorough answer, now is it? Um, yes, she's associated with death, and so are the Raven, and she's associated with the night, so darkness, the underworld, and she's a queen of the underworld, so we could go with the she's Lilith interpretation. But it still leaves open far too many narrative and lore-based threads. Okay, so we have a female being who makes crossroads deals. So how could she not be a demon? Well, it's very simple actually, because while the devil at the crossroads motif is certainly, especially in America, associated with the Christian cosmology or the Christian devil, the idea of a deal at the crossroads comes primarily from places like hoodoo and American folk magic, hoodoo, voodoo, etc. Um, Now, she's obviously not Baron Samedi either, because, again, female and associated with ravens. And while Baron Samedi is associated with death and with darkness, the raven interpretation bears a looser connection, and considering that her name is Verna and this is a Poe adaptation, I'm going to proceed from the assumption that the raven bit is kind of important and we're sticking with it. Now, mind you, this is where it gets interesting because you guys, well, most people might not know this, but the idea of deals being made at the crossroads or crossroads being spiritually significant, while it definitely does show up in hoodoo and folk magics of various different kinds, be it Kimbanda, be it Santerio, be it Brujeria, be it voodoo, etc., and so on. It's not the only place where crossroads are considered a liminal space that connects planes or connects worlds and where deals can be struck. That stuff actually goes back even further to polytheistic periods, particularly in Greece, Rome, and Egypt. Okay, so are there goddesses, or we probably should stick with goddesses because again, she is female. She is female in all of her guises, so we're sticking with the female thing as well. So she is a raven being. She is associated with crossroads or crossroad type deals, and she is female. And she's associated with the raven. So, raven goddesses or supernatural beings who are known for making deals and being associated heavily with liminality, crossroads, and death. Okay, that takes us to beings like Hecate. She is a goddess of witchcraft, the night, darkness, death, etc., and so on. And in some of her earliest lore that we have on her, she was considered a goddess of the crossroads, and much like Hermes and other messenger deities, was associated with being able to bridge worlds, particularly between the world of the mundane and the underworld. Okay, so could she be someone like Hecate? Well, yes, she could be a goddess like Hecate, and again, crossroads deal making, and in particular Hecate's association with the crossroads, goes back all the way to the the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri. But while Hecate is certainly associated with things like the raven, she's also associated with the black cat, and her strongest association is probably with the black dog. So that feels sort of disingenuous, especially because no Greek references appear in the story. Like, mostly it's actually Egyptian folklore that makes the most reoccurring references, because Roderick Usher is obsessed with ancient Greece, or rather ancient Egypt. So we will put a pin in the Egyptian possible connection for just a little bit more, because so while Hecate, yes, is a goddess, is associated with the crossroads, is even a triple goddess, which is somewhat significant because when Verna is talking to Roderick Usher's sister, whose name escapes me, she says, "I see all three of you," because she can see between worlds and between timelines. That is something else we learn about Verna as the series goes on. So, yes. Crossroads, Ravens, Triple Goddess. We seem to be moving in something resembling the right direction. So, someone stronger associated with ravens, who is also a triple goddess, also associated with manipulating fate, because what she essentially does is she alters the fates of the entire Usher family. In fact, she knows what they quote unquote would have been in other worlds or in other lives. And she makes a deal with them for wealth, power, etc., and so on, in a crossroads-ish fashion, um, as the show goes on. And she's associated with death, and she acts as a Grim Reaperish psychopomp in the vein of a raven for the majority of the series. So, a triple goddess who is stronger associated with ravens and is known to associate with crossroads and might have connections to a being like Hecate, or a being like Lilith, or a being like a devil at the crossroads. Now, we could go with the Morrigan. And in fact, when Mr. E and I were done watching the show the other day, the Morrigan was, I think, what we ultimately settled on. She is a triple goddess archetype. She is associated with fate and destiny. She is also heavily associated with death. Um, and she is known primarily in many of her epithets as the Raven Goddess. And she's almost always associated with ravens or crows. So is Verna the Morgan. We're certainly getting closer. We're certainly, I think, moving closer to the point. But the thing is, the folklore that informs most of the series um, is not Celtic folklore. Albeit there is a scene where in this show's version of the Mask of the Red Death, Verna takes the Mask of the Red Death position, and her costume does vaguely resemble Red Riding Hood. So maybe at a stretch you could say something fairy tale oriented, which yes does trace back to Celtic folklore. So the Morrigan could certainly work. Heavily associated with ravens, almost always accompanied or symbolized by ravens, a goddess of death, a goddess of fate, often considered a triple goddess, and on we move. But here too, there is the issue of it leaves a few too many open threads. There are pieces of this puzzle that, while certainly would fit the Morrigan, also there are puzzle pieces left over. And as anyone can tell you, when you're assembling a puzzle and you think you have it right, but there are pieces left over, either that means you have irrelevant puzzle pieces, which some puzzles do contain spare pieces, which, okay, fine. But is there anything we can do that would make this seem more sensible, would make it more straightforward, would accomplish the same pieces being moved into relatively the same place, but would actually account for more of the threads of the story? Something that could be said to be an objective answer, bearing in mind that the authors in question wanted to leave it open, therefore they are not going to bitch and whine about ethereal intent when we get to something we can describe as a definitive answer. And Poe, apart from providing, the Raven setup and being the backdrop of the series, isn't going to help. He never really focused excessively on pagan deities, so or the devil for that matter. He never played with the devil at the crossroads imagery. He's not Daniel Webster or Tom Walker or somebody like that. So we could go back to Poe, but Poe has basically helped all he's going to help with the figuring out of this question. The authors don't know and or didn't provide an answer, and are actually, thankfully, keeping their fucking mouths shut for once. So that's out. What we have left are the things in the story, the actual piece itself, the thing in itself, the artifact which we are trying to examine. And being as that is the case, we do have one final piece of the puzzle that isn't absorbed by the Morrigan or by Lilith or by some kind of other crossroads entity or even by Hecate, but that might work in favor of figuring out who Verna is. Namely, Roderick Usher has a constant and prevailing obsession with ancient Egypt and with mummification and with the funerary rites of the pharaohs. So, is there a raven associated goddess in ancient Egypt who is also heavily associated with death and the funerary rites and fate and destiny and so on and so forth? And actually, the answer to that question, which I figured out through like 5 seconds of Googling the other day, is yes, there is a goddess in the Egyptian pantheon who is heavily associated with the underworld, the death, fate, and the ravens, or crows. And that is Nephthys, the wife of Set, who also happens to have been a lover or mistress of Osiris for a little bit, and who by him, according to some of the lore, actually gave birth to the god Anubis, who is, of course, the guardian of the tomb and the god of mummification. And during that time period around Alexandrian Egypt, where Greek and Egyptian mythologies mixed, matched, merged, and cross-pollinated, one of the epithets that Nephthys was associated with, or one of the deities that Nephthys was associated with, was Hecate. Now, granted, Hecate Selene is usually the connection that most often appears, i.e., the connection between Hecate as a goddess of the crossroads and the underworld, and Selene, the goddess of the moon. But among the epithets frequently paired, just like her husband Set is associated with the Greek Typhon, a god of chaos and destruction, so too Hecate is sometimes referred to as Hecate Nephthys or Nephthys Hecate. So that takes care of being associated with the other lore that works for Hecate or for the Morrigan, because Hecate and the Morrigan are very often considered to be interchangeable, especially by modern day practitioners. So, we have a ancient Egyptian goddess of the underworld who is the mother of Anubis and is frequently associated with Hecate and with the raven. And by her association with Hecate, is also potentially associated with the Morrigan. And being as she's Egyptian and Roderick Usher is constantly obsessed with Egyptian mythology, and therefore the show is constantly obsessed with Egyptian mythology, I think Nephthys is the best fit. Now, mind you, you probably could still do the thing where, just like the ancient Greco-Egyptians, you combine these. You could say that Hecate, Nephthys, and the Morrigan are all the same entity. And as far as I'm concerned, you would be perfectly within your rights to do that. Especially because female crossroads deity who is heavily associated with the raven is most of what we have to go on. So, if you want to go there, fine, sure. But Nephthys is the only one who ties in the Egyptian angle as closely as it needs to be tied in for all the pieces to fall into place. And therefore, I think, is where we find our best answer. She is a triple goddess, heavily associated with the raven, who calls herself Verna, who has associations with the underworld. She explicitly refers to, a couple of times, her coming topside, which might, on first blush, associate her with the hell motif, and therefore go back to she-demon and thereby Lilith, but the underworld is also under the world, and she specifically refers to, in many occasions, people entreating her in ancient times with papyrus. And papyrus is, of course, the most heavily associated with ancient Egypt, which Roderick Usher is also obsessed with. And in several occasions, Verna acts through the agency of resurrecting a female dead person. In one case, it is Roderick Usher's mother, and in another case, it is his sister, a sister who he actually did the Egyptian burial rites on before she is resurrected. So the mother of Anubis, the wife of Set, and the erstwhile mistress/lover of Osiris, who is also sometimes heavily associated with ravens, and associated with Hecate and the Morrigan, seems to be the best fit. So Nephthys is what I'm going with. That's as far as I think we can be consistent. But yes, that is my final answer. And I think it is the most objective and defined answer that we can get to, considering that the authors didn't bother. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my summation. If you disagree or you spotted a different angle that I didn't notice, feel free to leave it in the comments. But all the pieces fit together with her being Nephthys, and thereby also possibly the Morrigan and Hecate, which still boils back down to Poe's the Raven. Perfectly fine. And on that note, I suppose this is where I end the excursion. I hope you enjoyed my ramblings, and hopefully my semi-mythological deductions don't hit too far from the mark. And hell, even if I'm wrong, or the writers say they want to get in on this action once and for all later on, it's at least a highly stable fan theory. MatPat can eat his heart out. But I have been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and this has been the first Mystic Zeologs in quite some freaking time, hasn't it? And as far as definitive answers go, I'd say this is probably a good one. Cheers, guys. I will see you all next time.